Oglethorpe Day 2018. We have a full house. Thank you so much for being with us, and I'm very excited in a minute to introduce our distinguished guest, Carrie Hessler-Radelet, who is a good friend and here with us to spend the day. But first, a few words about our namesake, James Edward Oglethorpe. The life of James Edward Oglethorpe is always, I think, important for us to recognize and to celebrate, but maybe no more so than this year, 2018. As I think we all should know, or hope we know, Oglethorpe was credited with founding the colony of Georgia in what year? Yeah, 1733. That will be on the quiz this afternoon. He arrived in Savannah with 114 men, women, and children to establish what would be England's first colony in over 50 years. But it was really his conception of the colony of Georgia, which I think is most extraordinary. So despite the great privilege that Oglethorpe was born into, he knew from his work as a prison reformer at an age not much older than you are students. He was an advocate for the poor in England, many of whom had been jailed because of debts that they owed. And he believed that the poor, given an equal opportunity, could be transformed into farmers and merchants and artisans. But he also understood that in order for that to happen, that the rules of the game would need to change. That rules would need to be put in place and enforced in this new colony to level the playing field and to prevent the massive income inequality which characterized England in that time. So among those rules were the requirements that all settlers in our new colony would have to work their own land, and therefore they could not rely on slaves to do that, and in fact was the only British colony at the time that outlawed slavery. And the rules forbid the accumulation of land, so every settler was given the same size house and the same size plot of land to work, and it was forbidden for them to acquire more and more land, because eventually if they owned a lot of land, they would then need other people to work it. Georgia's charter also prohibited Oglethorpe from holding office, from owning land himself, and from receiving a salary. So imagine that. The new colony had a motto. It was not make a life, make a living, make a difference. Unfortunately, we made that one up. But it was still a pretty good one. Not for self, but for others. Not for self, but for others. Refreshing motto then and now. He also chose to invite the unfavored minorities of the day, and back in that day there were religious minorities, to settle in Georgia. He believed that a fully diverse and open community committed to the well-being of all, not out for themselves, was to be the future of what became the state of Georgia. He was intent on putting Georgia and America, as we say today, on the right side of history. Unfortunately, Oglethorpe was a visionary, not a unique visionary then, but there weren't many like him in the 17th century, and we know that the story of our state and our country did not live up to his promise nor his vision. But we also know now that his vision was the right one. Oglethorpe was a globalist and a humanist. So that brings me to today, where I will introduce an extraordinary globalist and humanist, Carrie Hessler-Radelet. She's had a distinguished career in global public service. She was the third in her family to serve in the Peace Corps. I heard the story this morning. You'll hear that. It's a really fascinating story. She went on to serve a few years later, decades later, I guess, as director of the Peace Corps under President Obama for 6 years. She is now the president and CEO of Project Concern, continuing her life's work in public health and global development. It's my good fortune to sit on the board of the Council for International Educational Exchange CIEE, which is an Oglethorpe partner with Carrie. So please join me in giving a warm Oglethorpe welcome to Carrie Hessler-Radelet. Got it.
Well, I have a mic, okay.
Well, good afternoon.
Hi.
It's good to have you in Atlanta.
Nice to be here.
It is good to have you in Atlanta.
Thank you.
Let's begin a little bit with your career and maybe what landed you in the Peace Corps. Maybe besides the... Oops, I got to use the microphone. Yeah, how did you end up in the Peace Corps as a volunteer way back when?
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say what a pleasure and a privilege it is to be here. What a wonderful school, and how fantastic to see the running of the Petrels.
If you come late, I won last year.
Oh, you did?
So
Okay,
yeah, you missed it.
Yeah. He was going to run this time, but because he was hosting me, he couldn't.
Exactly.
Didn't want to show the students up. Anyway, it's wonderful to be here. And such a school that's dedicated to the values of our country. And I really believe they are the true values of our country. So it's just great to be here. I have a little bit of an unusual story. My story is a family story. I come from a family of Peace Corps volunteers. My aunt was a volunteer in the early 60s. She served in Turkey, and it just so happened, luck of the draw, that she was the 10,000th Peace Corps volunteer. Peace Corps was created in 1961 by President Kennedy. And just so happened that she was number 10,000 to swear in, so they did a big spread on her. My grandparents visited her while she was serving in Turkey, and they were so inspired by what they saw in her life, the fact that she had become a person that was so interested in serving others and had acquired a whole new language and had a very much broader worldview, that when they retired at age 68, they too served in the Peace Corps. They served as a couple in Malaysia. My grandfather was a professor at a university, which is a fairly unusual assignment for a Peace Corps volunteer, and my grandmother was a guidance counselor. And so by the time I graduated from high school in 1975 and was started at university myself, I really knew that I wanted to be a Peace Corps volunteer. In fact, my grandmother made it pretty clear that that was the expectation. I didn't have a choice in the matter.
Grandmothers can do that.
Yeah, grandmothers can do that, exactly. So, but then I met this guy, Steve Radelet, who I fell in love with, and he had literally never been out of the country, had never been on an airplane before. And I told him that, my plan was join the Peace Corps, and if that wasn't part of his program, we might as well call it quits right away. And he stuck it out with me, and so we got married shortly after we graduated from college, and we served together in the Peace Corps. We were sent to Western Samoa, a tiny little island in the Pacific, and we taught at an all-girls Catholic school, Pope Paul VI College. And he taught math and science, and I taught English, history, geography, music, and PE. So basically every other subject. I also ran the school library. And it was really a wonderful experience, but my future, I think, really evolved through my relationship with my host mother. One of the things about Peace Corps is that they assign you a host family, and that is your cultural ambassador. You live with them in some cases. We ended up living with them for a year. They're the ones that teach you the language. I mean, you have a whole training program, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But, when we arrived in our community ready to start teaching, it was Losa and Vianney who really became our anchor in that community. And Losa was 32 years old. I was 24 at the time. Losa was 32, and she already had 8 children. Think of that. And when I got there, she was really interested in the fact that I wasn't pregnant immediately. And started asking me all sorts of questions about family planning, and I answered them to the best of my ability. And so we spent a lot of time together and really got to know each other well. So after I had been there about 6 months, I came home from school one day, and she was sobbing desperately. She was crying so hard that she could not speak. It was like that kind of belly cry where you can hardly breathe. And I thought one of her kids had died. But what she told me when she finally was able to speak was that she had just found out that she was pregnant with her 9th child. And she was devastated. She could not imagine how she was going to manage a 9th pregnancy. Her youngest was only 14 months old. His name was Pita. She was exhausted. Her day started every day at 4 a.m. and it went until late at the night. They lived in a one-room fale, which is basically a wooden floor, 11 posts and a thatched roof. Everyone sleeping together on the floor there. She cooked over an open fire. She washed the clothes by hand. She ironed those school uniforms, every single one of them, with an iron that had coals in it. So she had to make a fire and then put the coals into the iron and then iron the uniforms. They were always spotless. She made sure that her kids went to school every day and that they studied their homework. They were excellent parents, but she was absolutely exhausted and did not know how she was going to go through this pregnancy. And so I knew nothing. I was a political science major, which is a great major, by the way. I want to say that. But it didn't teach me anything about pregnancy. But I told her that when my mom was pregnant, she went to a nurse or a doctor. And I said, where do you go for medical care? And she says, I've never been to medical care for any of my pregnancies. And I said, well, where do you deliver your baby? And she said, right here on the floor of my house. And I said, well, who tends you? Who helps you? And she says, my mother-in-law, who looked to me like she's about 150. She's probably 70, but anyway. So I said, Losa, I don't know anything about this, but I think you need to go see a health professional. And I knew that there was a clinic 1 mile away on a paved road, because as a Peace Corps volunteer, we had to map our community, and I had mapped that facility. So I said, can you please just go with me to this clinic? And so she agreed, and we went to the clinic, and there's a wonderful midwife there, and the midwife said, Losa, you're an incredibly high risk, this is a very high risk pregnancy, and you need to come here every month, you need to take these iron folate tablets, and you need to deliver your baby here in the facility where we have emergency equipment. And she was just crestfallen. She knew that her husband, Vianney, would never go for it. So we walked back up the hill to her house, and sure enough, Vianney said, you can go to the clinic once a month to see her, if it's free, which it was. You can take the iron tablets every month, if they're free, which they were, but there's absolutely no way you're going to be delivering your baby in that clinic, because Samoan babies are born at home, surrounded by the faces of the people who love them. And those first faces have to be that family, which makes some, that makes some sense, right? Except, we were all very worried about her. Anyway, but the man was a decision maker in Samoa at that time, and so that was it. She was not going to deliver her baby at the health facility. But he agreed she could go every month, so we went together every single month, and the midwife was incredibly wise, and I learned so much from her. She started scheduling Losa at the end of the day so that she would walk back up the hill to our house with us every single time after her visit. And she sat down and had tea or had dinner with us, and she would talk to Vianney, at first about, football or the neighbors or whatever gossip there was in the neighborhood, just to build a relationship with him, to get him comfortable with her. And then eventually, after about 6 months, she started talking to him about how important it was for her to deliver her baby at the facility. By this time, they had a relationship. And so finally, in her 8th month, he agreed that she could deliver her baby in this facility. So on the night she went into labor, it was raining. It was the middle of the night. It always is for some reason. Put her in the back of her cousin's really beat up old pickup truck, brought her down to the health center, 5 minutes away. Literally within minutes, she delivered a baby, beautiful baby Margarita. And 5 minutes later, she went into postpartum hemorrhage. She would have bled to death. She would have died if she had not been in that facility where there was a blood supply, where there was Oxycontin, which stops the bleeding, where she had access to an ambulance that then took her to the regional hospital. She would have, without question, died. And so I like to say that my career in public health, and that is my career, I spent 25 years doing public health. My career was born that day as well, because seeing the many barriers that existed for Losa, any health planner would have told you she had excellent access to care, 1 mile away on a paved road. but there were so many cultural and economic barriers to her. And if it hadn't been for the wisdom of that midwife, by the way, I didn't play much of a role. It was really the midwife who was so wise and worked within that culture to create a relationship of trust between her family and the health facility. She saved her life that day. I learned so much from that midwife, and I can't tell you, almost every day I think back to her and how much she influenced my choice of career, but also the way that I carried out my career. So that's my story. After I finished Peace Corps, and by the way, I'm still very close with LOSA to this day.
Yeah, so as you tell that story, it's like it happened yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so interesting. And
Yeah.
so what, I looked up Western Samoa
Yeah.
in Wikipedia, so I would know something about it.
Yeah, good.
I knew sort of where it was, but I knew very little about it.
Football players.
Football players, but I'm sure lots of people in this audience would have a hard time pinpointing it on a map. So, like, what are we doing in Western Samoa? Like, why
we're there?
Why are you there?
Yeah.
Like, why are we sending Americans to Western Samoa?
Very good question. Let me start with why Peace Corps was created.
Okay.
It was created by John F. Kennedy in 1961, and it has the mission of world peace and friendship. Pretty bold at the time, but also hard to measure and hard to achieve. But it has 3 goals to help us get there. The first goal is to provide trained men and women to help the receiving countries meet their own development needs. So this is a goal to help our country build partners and allies who are committed to the same values we are committed to, so that they can lead their own development. Because we know from evidence that countries that are economically strong, that respect the rights of its citizens, that respect human rights, are much more likely to be safe, prosperous, and good global partners in the world, and we care about that. So the first goal is a development goal, to help them with their own development. The second goal is to promote a better understanding of Americans on the part of people served. So it's a people-to-people diplomacy goal, build better relationships between our people and theirs. And then the third goal is to promote a better understanding of other countries on the part of Americans. So I learned a lot about Samoa as part of that experience. And that is, the intention of that is to create a globally competent American people. And President Kennedy is, he said that, on the day when we have 100,000 Peace Corps volunteers a year, we will have a globally competent American people. Well, we're still only at 7,000 volunteers a year. But President Kennedy was incredibly forward-leaning. He also created the U.S. Agency for International Development. And he genuinely cared about the fact that our nation exists within a network of other nations, and that our well-being is enhanced by strong relationships with other countries.
All right, so let's take a step. So you finish your 2 years?
2 years, 2.5 years. So basically the model is you go, you make a 2.5 years, really 27-month commitment. The first 3 months are language training, cross-cultural training, and then training in whatever you are going to do as a job. So we have 6 sectors: education, health, agriculture, environment, youth development, and community economic development. So as part of that, you would receive training on how to do that skill in that particular country. So first 3 months are training. You're assigned to a community that has requested your services. The country actually has to request Peace Corps. We don't decide where to send people. They have to actually go through a very formal process where the president has to send a letter to our president and invite Peace Corps, and then we have a negotiation with them about what it is, what are their development needs, and how we could accomplish that. And so then, we're sent there with an agreement that our volunteers are going to, be health workers, or they're going to be teachers, or they're going to be youth entrepreneurial coaches, let's say, and they live within a community. But they do so much more than that. They get to know the pregnant woman next door. They play soccer with the kids at the primary school. They have tea with the village elder. And it's through that in-between time, their lived presence in the community, where they begin to understand that community, They begin to see the world through their eyes. They share who they are. They share their hopes and their dreams and their fears. And the community members open up to them and share their lives and their fears and their hopes for their communities. And it's through that deep relationship of trust, which takes years to build, where people are really, developing friendships from the heart, that enables a volunteer to understand the opportunities for development and also the barriers to development in that community, and also gives them the credibility to be agents of change. Volunteers never do they never do the work themselves. They always work within the leadership that exists within a community, but they're often informal leaders. So it's just like here in your campus, there are people here who are natural leaders, and they organize other people and mobilize other people. We have a real great tradition here of activism. Well, that exists in every part of the world, so the job of the volunteer is to try to tap into that and understand what makes that community tick, and then use that as an opportunity to achieve the development goals that they have come to do,
Right.
to accomplish.
So there have been, how many now thousands of Peace Corps volunteers have
About
there been?
250,000
Okay. So,
over the past 57 years.
okay. So not all of them have gone on to be the head of the Peace Corps, I'm thinking.
Not all of them, but you
Okay.
want to know a funny story?
Okay.
So here's a funny story. So when I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and there were only 52 volunteers in Samoa when I was there, the head of our region, which was the Asia Near East region, came to visit Samoa, and her name was Jody Olson, and she came to visit. Whenever I went out to visit, or whenever any official with Peace Corps goes out, you go and visit volunteers. So she came to visit me in my community, and she actually stayed overnight. We actually had to give up our bed so she could sleep in our bed. And she stayed with me. Well, she is the new nominee to be Peace Corps director. So it turns out that night in Samoa, 2 future directors
Slept in the same
slept
bed?
under the same house, under the same roof. Yeah.
So just share us a little bit about what year did you end up in the 77, 78?
No. I graduated from college in 79. I didn't go into Peace Corps until 81.
81,
And
okay.
I completed Peace Corps service in 84.
And
I
then you
came
became-
back, I found my passion for public health. I came back, I actually worked for Peace Corps for 2 years as a public affairs specialist, basically writing stories about Peace Corps. It was a great job. And then I went to graduate school in public health, and I got a master's in public health. My husband and I had an international career. My work has always been in international public health. I work for an organization called JSI, John Snow Incorporated. It's actually one of the largest American public health organizations. I started as an intern in graduate school, and I worked my way up to VP and head of the international division. And I seriously thought that I would retire from there. And we lived in West Africa. We lived in Indonesia for 5 years. I mean, I went overseas and was doing public health work, especially around maternal and child health and HIV/AIDS. And thought I'd retire doing that when completely out of the blue, I got a phone call from the White House asking me if I'd like to be the deputy director of the Peace Corps. And I was flabbergasted. I hadn't even been all that active in the campaign, although I was certainly an Obama supporter, but I wasn't what you think of when you think of a political appointee at all. But I knew how to run operations. At the time, I was running an organization that had a budget that was bigger than the Peace Corps, and it was in more countries. And they needed a deputy director that could run operations. So they called me, and I almost said no, but then I thought, I will never get a chance like this again. And so I said yes. I was afraid it would take me away from my public health career, and it has, for sure. But I have never looked back. It was just the most wonderful time. I was actually there for 7 years. I was about a year and a half as deputy director, and then the director left, and I then became the director. The former director left, and then I became the director of the Peace Corps, which I held for 5 years, and a little more than 5 years. And it was an extraordinary experience. And I visited, I now, through my career, both with Peace Corps and prior to that time, have worked in and visited more than 100 countries. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So, did you ever meet the president?
Oh, many times.
Many times.
Yeah, many times.
So talk a little bit about what's it like to work, was it like to work for him?
Oh, he and his wife, in fact, I worked very closely with Michelle Obama. We started a program called Let Girls Learn, which is a program in girls' education and empowerment. I'll talk about that in a moment. But the president is just exactly the way you'd want him to be. He is humble, he is hilariously funny, he's got a great sense of humor. He's just so warm and principled, ethical, respect for the office. I didn't know him before I became the director. I met him when I became the deputy. But he literally has 10,000 political appointees. I mean, it's not a small number. But he remembered me. He remembered my name, from the very beginning. And, just like everybody else, there's nothing particularly special about me, but he is just that kind of person. I miss him so much. Let me just say that right now.
Whose portrait do you like better?
I haven't seen his new one.
You haven't seen the new one?
I haven't seen the new one. I heard about it on the radio. I've got to give you a vision of it. I heard it has green leaves like Samoa or like Indonesia. See, I lived 5 years in Indonesia, and so we used to speak to each other in Indonesian. Yeah, he still speaks Indonesian, so do I.
So you want to talk about Michelle?
Yeah, I love Michelle Obama, by the way. She and I started a program called Let Girls Learn. It was a whole of government initiative. Yes, it's fantastic. It was our country's initiative to educate and empower girls and young women, and especially to try to get them into secondary school and keep them in school so that they could either go into university or become economic engines of their community. All of the research has shown that if you want to develop a country, a community, a country, anywhere, the single most effective investment is to educate a girl. Lindsey Graham said, it is the single most important thing you can do. Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, said once, the thing that ISIS fears the most is an educated girl, a girl in school, and it is true. So we started this program, and although it was a whole of government initiative, it was her focus was really on Peace Corps volunteers. And she loves Peace Corps volunteers. She continues to love Peace Corps volunteers to this day. Because she saw them as our country's last mile ambassador, which is exactly what they are. And, she's a community mobilizer herself. They both are. And she really cared about communities because she knew that that's where everything happened. We can have the best laid plans, the best strategies in the world, but if they're not taking root at the community, they're not going to make a difference in people's lives. And so she chose the Peace Corps as being her primary partner agency. And for 2 years, we worked together very closely. We traveled together.
She did travel?
She traveled with us. Yeah, she visited volunteers. Both of them visited volunteers wherever they went. One of my favorite stories was just a year ago in Liberia. We went to Liberia together. We actually had Frida Pinto with us and Aisha Cisse from CNN was there too. I think she lives here
Could be.
in Atlanta. Anyway, so we went to a Girls Leading Our World camp, which is Peace Corps' GLOW camp, Girls Leading Our World. It's our women's empowerment, girls and women's empowerment camp. And she wanted to see how Peace Corps volunteers were working with the girls in the communities. And so we organized some sessions for her to demonstrate some of the activities that Peace Corps volunteers were doing in their communities. And one of the sessions was a session where where volunteers were helping to sew reusable menstrual pads. Well, this is a subject people don't talk about very much, but having your menstrual period is a reason that girls around the world miss school for a week every month because they don't have menstrual pads. And there are no sanitary facilities in their schools. Some of these kids go to schools where there are no latrines, no outhouses, no bathrooms. And so the girls miss school. And so having a menstrual pad means that girl can stay in school every day and learn. And so we were there, and some Peace Corps volunteers were working with these girls to make these pads. And there was this one guy, And he was a big old husky guy. I think he had been a hockey player. He had a beard, kind of looked like Duck Dynasty to me. And he was sitting there, and he was sewing this menstrual pad, and it was hysterical. She was laughing her head off. And the girls were with us too. Malia and Sasha were with us too. And, and her mother, Mrs. Robinson. We were all there. But it was so impressive, this Peace Corps volunteer, who was entirely comfortable with this, by the way, because he was so convinced of the importance of this. He was a teacher himself. He was a teacher at a local school. He knew how those girls needed these products. And he was demonstrating for Sasha and Malia how he was teaching his girls at his school how to make menstrual pads. It was a beautiful scene.
Okay.
I'm
I'm trying to picture it, but.
Yeah.
Okay.
You got to be able to talk about everything if you're in the Peace Corps.
There you go. So you talked about 1961 and the vision for the Peace Corps. You also mentioned that the goal was to have 100, how many a year?
President Kennedy envisioned 100,000 volunteers per year.
And it's never been more
It's
than?
never been more than 16,000, and it was only 16,000 for 1 year, 1968. And then when President Nixon came in, he tried to kill the Peace Corps. And so we went down to 4,000 that year, but he never managed to kill it. And in fact, now Peace Corps has been sustainable between 7,000 and 9,000. It got up to 9,000 during my time, but now it's about 7,000. It has remained about that ever since the late 60s, early 70s.
Okay.
But I also want to say, and this is important, it has widespread appeal on both sides of the aisle. It is not just, it has become an American organization. It is one of the very few federal agencies that is beloved by just about every member of Congress. And I have to say that here in Georgia, your senators especially have been phenomenally supportive of the Peace Corps. Johnny Isaacson, who is your senior.
Right. And the junior senator too?
Yeah, well, yeah, he is.
Yeah?
Yeah, he
Okay.
is. He is. He is supportive of the Peace Corps. It's hard to not love the Peace Corps. It has a very low budget and has a huge impact.
So I was going to get to this later, but I'll ask the question now. So in the budget I've seen for 2018, it's a pretty dramatic slash
Everything.
to everything, but including the Peace Corps.
Yeah.
And then I was reading a little bit about, so the position of director has sat empty since you left. I guess it's been an interim.
Yeah, I appointed someone, a civil servant, who's been doing a great job,
Sure.
but yeah.
But then this new nominee, which I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
Jody Olson. She'll
yeah,
be
but,
fantastic, by the way. Do
so
not
it-
be afraid to join Peace Corps.
Right, so it seems like, at least in this case, there's an appointee who was a Peace Corps volunteer and who loves it and believes in the mission.
Yes, we're very fortunate to have her. Absolutely.
Good.
It could have been terrible, but it isn't. But you're probably wondering, what's going to happen to the Peace Corps. And I would just say that the president has submitted his 2019 budget. Mind you, we don't yet have a 2018 budget. We're on a 2017 continuing resolution, so we're not able to, in this country to get even a budget. Peace Corps, I said earlier, it has very widespread support, as does the rest of the international affairs budget. So we're within something called the 150 account, which is the international affairs budget. It's everything from State Department to the United States Agency for International Development, to the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, the Money Challenge Corporation, the U.S. Institute of Peace. There are all sorts of agencies, 22 of them, that are within the international affairs budget. Peace Corps is one of them. He has called for a 30% cut to the whole international affairs budget. The Peace Corps actually did not receive that big as much as the others have. It was separated out, but it still is requesting, the president has requested a pretty dramatic cut. Congress has already said that budget is dead on arrival. There's a huge bipartisan support for international development and diplomacy. There is broad understanding among most of members of Congress of the importance of that account to maintaining our position in the world. Our world is incredibly complex and interconnected, far more than it was when Kennedy started the Peace Corps, started USAID. President Kennedy started it because he was concerned about war and poverty and disease and the threat of of nuclear war. all of those still exist today, and so much more. You know, the rising refugee crisis, globalization, climate change, very serious endemic diseases that can spread like wildfire. I mean, our world is an incredibly complex and interconnected place now. And so we really need to exert global leadership. Our country's national security and economic prosperity depend upon it. And so happily, even members of Congress who, even within the president's own party, do not agree with him on this, and they've said that his budget is dead on arrival. The Senate for the 2018 budget, again, so that was last year's budget, the president requested a 30% cut. The House gave it a 9% cut, and the Senate gave it a 1.6% cut. So you can see that they dramatically upped the budget. Peace Corps actually was flatlined. So within Congress, there's a lot of support for the work that we do, with the recognition that it's not possible to dial back our engagement. And even though the president may have a policy of America first, it's not, you know, that doesn't mean that we don't engage in the world. It would be so harmful to our country if we dial back on our global leadership.
So talk a little bit about so there is a sense, at least among a significant portion of the American population, that there are so many issues in this country that sort of we need to take care of home before we take care of the rest of the world. That's maybe a fair way to state it. Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about what's your view of the Peace Corps, but these other agencies, and how does that sort of fit into does that completely contradict you to an America First policy, or is there a way to sort of think about our global work as putting America first in some ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that putting America first means investing in our own global leadership. Frankly, whether or not that's what the president intends, that is the only strategy going forward, because of the fact that our world is so interconnected. I do understand people saying that we have our own problems. We need to focus on problems at home, but sort of the premise of Peace Corps is that you become a volunteer, you work with communities in developing countries for 2 years, you learn skills and tools that you can apply back home in communities here. And if you choose to go and work in communities of great need, there's a great deal of transference of learning that can take place globally, you know, from overseas experience that can be applied in communities right here. In fact, we have very active partnerships between AmeriCorps and the Peace Corps, and many returned Peace Corps volunteers go on to be teachers and social workers and nurses and doctors and helping professions that really benefit our country. I mean, their global, the impact of, or ripple effect of their global outlook stays with them for the rest of their lives. And they, by their mere presence in a community, are adding to our understanding of the need for us as a country to embrace the global community and to become global citizens. That's the way we make our country great, is by engaging effectively with the family of nations. I mean, in addition, our own country is becoming increasingly multicultural and diverse. So even if we're just going to think about our own borders, we need intercultural skills that will help us to work effectively with our own people. And Peace Corps is really an excellent way to gain those intercultural and language and cross-cultural skills.
So I know we've had a number of Oglethorpe grads eventually go into the Peace Corps either directly or afterward. What would you say to the students here about the Peace Corps as a way to begin a career, and how does one, if they have interest,
do that?
They just go on the website and.
Yeah. It's that easy, actually. Yeah, no, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, it's a scary thought to go overseas for 2.5 years. I was terrified, and I had all sorts of family support for it. But it is an extraordinary, life-changing experience, and it completely changes your trajectory in life. There are 250,000 return volunteers. It's really like a club. People, hire return volunteers. Many of the global leaders that we have in our country have been Peace Corps volunteers. The head of Netflix was a Peace Corps volunteer. The head of Levi Strauss was a Peace Corps volunteer. A number of members of Congress. You might have seen Joe Kennedy who gave the democratic response at the State of the Union. He was a Peace Corps volunteer. They are, you know, and then they're teachers or they're nurses. That, you know, they're people who do good things in our community. It's a great way to start a job or a career. If you are interested, you just have to go to the website. You can Google Peace Corps, and it's basically www.peacecorps.gov. There's an online application. One of the things I did when I was director is we made that application really, really easy. It used to be a very lengthy process. It used to take 8 hours, start to finish, to apply to the Peace Corps, because there were so many essays and other things that you had to do. And so we made it very easy. You can literally apply to the Peace Corps in 45 minutes. We eventually ask you for other things, but it's not until after you're sort of, you're accepted and hooked, and then we ask you for your medical records and what have you, your legal records.
That's the way we do admissions here.
Yeah, it's smart, it's smart. Make it really easy to apply, and then you get them on the backside, yeah. But, and the other thing that's really different, and this was not the case when I was there, is when I was a Peace Corps volunteer, I didn't get to choose where I went. I mean, I was telling the folks earlier at breakfast, I spoke Spanish pretty well, and I was certain they'd send me to a Spanish-speaking country. No, they sent me to Samoa. And I was grateful they did. I learned a lot about a part of the world I would never have been to. But now you can choose where you want to go and what you want to do. So if you speak Spanish and you want to practice your Spanish or your French or your Arabic or your Swahili, you can apply to programs in that language group. If you know that you're really interested in doing public health, or you want to be a teacher, or you want to work with young people, or you love the environment, you can apply for a program in those areas. And you have to compete against people who are applying to the same program. So there are some programs that are more competitive than others. For example, the Coastal Water Management Project in Fiji is very hotly contested. As is the, you know, maternal and child health program in Peru, and, you know, it's predictable which countries are going to be more competitive than others. It's actually quite competitive now. We only accept, when I was there, I've been out for a year. I should have said in the beginning, I am no longer employed by Peace Corps, so everything I say is my own thing. It has nothing to do with the agency. But we were receiving 25,000 applications for 4,000 slots. So that's how competitive it is. But we take a serious look at community service. So if you are community minded, that will be really important. We want people who are committed to service. We want people who are interested in other people. We are interested in people who want to make a life, make a living, make a difference. That's what we're really looking for.
That's the new slogan of the Peace Corps.
Yeah,
I'm thinking, we will sell it to you. We'll sell it.
For a very small price, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, please join me in thanking Carrie for being with us. Close us out.
Hi everybody, I'm Beth Concepcion, Director of the A-Lab, and I would like to thank Carrie Hessler-Radelet for coming today. We've got a water bottle for you because her new organization is Project Concern International.
Thank you.
And is very interested in water resources. Also, we have a t-shirt, and we've made a donation to Project Concern International on behalf of Oglethorpe.
Oh, that's awesome.
Thank you so much.
Next
You
year.
can run in the race next year. You'll win it, I'm sure. So if you're wondering what's behind the curtain, it's